Good morning. So let's get started. Any questions um, about the homework? You had a homework due today, um, so hopefully you had the opportunity to upload that. That's the strategy that we are going to use throughout the semester. You're going to upload your PDF file into tracks. So and then the TA is going to grab the submission from there. He's going to grade the homework. So if there's no questions, we're going to get started with the lecture. Today I have two things that I want to accomplish. First is this lecture material on system thinking, and the second is go over the instructions for the project, for the semester project. So let's see how far we can go. So we spent the first few lectures discussing what systems engineering is. We provided an introduction to systems engineering. Today, we're gonna look at the foundation of systems engineering. Everything is based on concepts coming from this theory on system thinking, and we're going to spend some time explaining what system thinking is, and also providing you with some concepts and also some diagrams that are used within this subject. So let's get started. Here's the references. So the material that we are covering this morning is coming from these two references in red. I had a student who came to the office asking me about some of the concepts that we discussed in class. So hopefully the discussion that we are having in class should be enough for you to be able to answer the questions in the homework. But if you feel that you need extra, you can always come to the office, but you can also refer to your textbook. The textbook, I encourage you to read the material that we are using through the semester. This is well explained also as in your textbook. So if you go to the syllabus, I have put the lecture materials that are related to the lectures that we are covering every day. And the textbook for the class is available online for free in the library. So if you go to the Texas State Library, they have the textbook. You don't have to buy it. You have access to it for free. So you have the material on hand. You just go to the main page of the library and type the textbook title, and you should be able to get the electronic version of the textbook. Okay, so this is the agenda for this morning. We are going to discuss what systems thinking is, and then we are going to talk about some of the basic models for system thinking, and then we're going to spend some time discussing what are the system construct and the system principles. So as I mentioned, we have system thinking as the foundation for systems engineering, and we need to understand what are the concepts behind this foundation. I always like to start the lecture with some quotes from famous people. So this is coming from a speech from the U.S. Senate by William Fulbright in 1964, and he said that we must dare to think about unthinkable things, because when we think, when things become unthinkable, thinking stops and action becomes mindless. So the idea is, again, we want to be capable of designing things that are new, that are relevant, that are complex, and push the frontier in terms of coming with something that is functional, but at the same time capable of achieving our objectives by implementing some of the things that we are discussing in class. So what is system thinking? System thinking is recent, at least as an identifiable practice. There are a lot of books on the subject, but different authors view the subject differently. So it is as yet an unconstrained discipline. So we cannot say, okay, system thinking is this. There's a lot of viewpoints. However, our focus is on the key concepts of system thinking and see how they are part of systems engineering, which is the goal for this class. Okay, so we're going to be focusing on those key concepts within the system thinking practice, and we want to see how those are part of systems engineering. So from here we move to what is the mechanistic worldview. The goal of science was analysis, the breaking down of the phenomena into smaller parts. By that way, you wanted to get extra or additional understanding of how things work. So the idea was to isolate of individuals' causal factors. So this is happening because this is pushing, or this is moving, or this is affecting the behavior of a part or a organism. So for example, the breakdown of organisms until we get to the cells, processes until we get to the minor activities, behaviors, also understanding the behaviors until we get to the point of understanding reflex mass, until the point that we get to understand the atoms, and many more examples. So the idea of individual units acting on their own in one way, causality proved insufficient to explain observed phenomena. So the more we get into dividing or understanding the small pieces, even though we were getting farther and farther into isolating these pieces, we found out that that was not enough to understand all the observed phenomena. So in the same vein, the mechanistic worldview had difficulties with ideas of directed behavior or teleology. And teleology, I have definition here. That is the explanation of phenomena by the purpose they serve rather than the postulated causes. So the mechanistic worldview had a hard time understanding some of the directed behavior and also the teleology. Analysis down to the individual in the isolated components erases all trace of directed, adaptive, or goal-seeking behavior, which is mostly what we observe in living organisms. So it was viewed as a mysterious and beyond the realm of the scientific research. So organization of people or organisms was inaccessible to mechanistic science, concerned with role, hierarchy, structure, dominance, and submission, control, and so on, none which appeared in, for example, physics, or the science of physics. So understanding this type of behavior like growing, structure, hierarchy, dominance, submission, control, was very difficult to explain within the mechanistic point of view. So a need for something additional to the mechanistic world was important in order to try to understand these behaviors. So that's how the concept of open system was developed. Okay, now we understand that, okay, there's a behavior, there's an output happening, we understand the small pieces, but we also know that there are interactions that are coming from the environment that are creating some of these outputs that are not easy to understand by just looking at the small pieces. We need to look also to the environment. So the concept of open systems emerged in response to the shortcomings of the mechanistic worldview. Open system is fundamental in modern biology. As I mentioned, most of the living organisms, the way they behave, the way they act, not easy to explain with a mechanistic point of view. So the basis of open system is dynamic interactions of the components. So it's not just understanding the pieces or the subsystems, systems, parts, but also understanding the interaction between them. So this is differentiated from the cybernetic model. We're going to talk about it in a few minutes, which is based only on feedback. So what are the characteristics of an open system? They're able to ingest and produce waste. So for example, a car. You put gas, they produce some type of gas emissions, and so on. Able to reproduce. So these are more within the living organisms. Can exhibit growth. Can be stable at high energy levels. And also, they can die. The theory of open system is part of the general system theory. Okay, so as we are discussing this, we need to keep in mind that we are looking at understanding systems, system thinking, and these open systems theory is part of it. So let's look at some basic system models, and these are relevant not only for understanding system thinking, but when you start looking at your project, you want to have an understanding of, depending on the environment that your system is going to be performing, you want to have an understanding of how things are going to interact. So these basic system models are relevant in that sense. So I'm going to go through this list. We have 8 different ones. I'm pretty sure that you're familiar with the last one. At least you have heard this before. But from this list, I believe that the other 7 are new for most of you. So let's start with this one. This is called the hierarchy Hochschicht model. And the idea is to show different levels of hierarchy within it. So this is, again, very simple representation of that hierarchy. You have circles, and each circle represents like a boundary for that system. But as you can see, within each circle, there's other circles that are connected to each other. So for instance, you can think about this is your system, and within it you have subsystems that are connected to each other that as together they're creating the overall system. And within each subsystem, you have other group of parts that are working together, or components, to generate that subsystem. So the idea here is, again, to show you the hierarchy of, or the levels of building that overall system. The boundary, again, within the environment, the inside that you have the environment within the system. So how these subsystems are going to interact will depend also on the environment. You have connections between them, so this tells you that the union of these components is generating the actual subsystem in this case. And this overall system that you're seeing here, so let's call this your system, also have connections, which means that, for example, if you are designing a car and inside the car you have all the subsystems of the car, but you know that the car is going to be interacting with other systems, so you can have other Hochschicht models connected to the car, denoting the interaction of those systems. So for instance, in this example, you can have 4 levels of hierarchy. Number 1 is a group of people that have different skills, and then when you put them together, they form, in this case, a maintenance team. And with that team, you can have other teams within your company. So when you combine this team combines with operation and logistic teams, they form an operational unit. Now you have within the system, you have an operational unit, And this operational unit joins with helicopters and communication unit to form a rapid reaction force. So again, you started with people with different skills and you started building these teams, these groups, until you end up having this reaction force. So that's the idea. You start seeing the differences between the hierarchies, and then you start building your components, systems, subsystems until you generate the overall system. So that's the pull shape. Very simple diagram, but powerful in terms of showing you the hierarchy within your system. This is called the Open Systems Model, and we just learned the importance of open systems. Again, these are the characteristics of open systems. So stabilize at high energy levels, can exhibit a variety of behaviors, comply with physical conservation laws. Exception 2, if you have the conservation principle will not apply if you're dealing with information. You know, information can be shared, but you can also keep it at the same time, like data. So that can be given in a way that still retained. Some examples. Here, open systems, as I mentioned, the car, you have multiple inflows, like the driver, the oil, the gas, the air, the oxygen, the information, and then when you provide that to the car, you generate some outflows, the driver, the emissions, the heat, the motion, and electricity. So that's what we're trying to illustrate with this open system. So within the environment, you're going to have this contained systems, and you're going to be providing some type of input that within the system will generate some output. Okay, so the interaction of the system with the environment plus this information or inflow will generate some output, which is the reaction of all of this together. So there occurs some dynamic interaction of the system elements. This is a model that I mentioned a few minutes ago, the Cybernetic Model. And the idea on this one, this provides or offers a control view of the world. The output corresponds to some desired input and this model has been applied to management. In which, for instance, you can provide tasks, people will report the progress, or you're gonna overview the progress, and if the progress is not the one that you're expecting, then you're gonna provide some corrective measures. So think about this. When you're a student, you get an assignment or a project. The instructor for that class is expecting you to create something as part of that project. So the instruction is giving you the ideas or the instructions that you need to follow in order to get those that output, that desired output. And then you provide a report based on that. Let's say after a week, you started working on that project. You get to one point, you provide a progress report, and if you have not matched the desired input, which is what the task, how the task was assigned, you wanted to do this, let's say you needed to generate, or you needed to design a battery that will hold this much energy, you report back. If you have not achieved that progress or that outcome, then there are going to be some corrective measures that are going to happen that will allow you to get back to the task and get back to work until you achieve that desired output. So that's what we are doing with this cybernetic model. We have a desired output in mind, and we are providing tasks, and then we are providing corrective action until that is achieved. Another example, like here we have, let's say we have a control unit, activation unit, control process, and some information system going on. So let's say this is part of a car, and you're currently driving at 75 miles per hour, but you want to get to 77. So what you will do, in order to achieve that output, you need to push the gas pedal, right? So you will push the gas pedal until you get to the desired output. But after you perform that action, which is a corrective action, there are other things that are going to happen within the car that will allow you to get to that point, right? So you have the output in mind. You look at the current output. If you have not achieved that outcome, then you perform some corrective actions until you get to that point. Same thing here. Functional interactions and physical interfaces for an airplane that is trying to land. Right? So let's say this airplane needs to land by 4 p.m. Maybe the airplane is far away. So in order for the airplane to arrive to the airport at that time, you might need to perform some corrective action. Let's say accelerate or find a shorter route to the airport in order to achieve the outcome that is arriving to the airport by 4 o'clock. Cybernetic model. Here's another interesting model. This is an open loop control model. So cybernetic model, open loop control model. This is more related to human behavior. Again, the example that I just provided in terms of professors and students, for officers and soldiers. So the idea again is the person who's providing you with the task has a mental model. Okay? He wants you to perform certain activities so you can achieve that goal that he has in mind. So the person, let's say the director, is going to provide you with the instructions in order to see if you can tune it with his mindset, meaning that you are capable of understanding what the goals are. So you provide the instructions, the person are going to perform actions, interpreting and expanding instruction using actor's own mental model. So you get the instruction from this person, and he uses that information and his own understanding of it to get to action. And then if that outcome is achieved or not, then you're going to get that feedback from that person. So if you have achieved the outcome, you're good. If not, then some corrective actions are going to happen. This is called the process model. This is more tied to industrial and manufacturing engineering. So a process, let me just define what a process is. A process is a set of interrelated activities usually with some purpose or outcome. So the process qualities. So what we're trying to show here again, you have an initiation, you have a process model, and you have an output. But within the process model, there's a lot of things that are happening, right? There's a lot of overlapping. You have the financial model, you have the resource model, and within the resource model, you also have a lot of things happening. You have personnel, you have materials, you have tools, you have facilities. So The idea here is how do you represent all the things that are happening in a simple way, right? You can name your process, and you can name the initiation and the outcomes, but within the process you can also split the activities in an organized way so you understand what's going on within this circle. So this is the process model in general. The process qualities as a system if the activities complement each other to produce the product or outcome. And if the activities are able to interact. Okay, so this statement basically, when we think about systems, I want you to see that you are not only thinking about something physical, like you are not only thinking about designing a car, or you're not just thinking about designing a building. A system can be a process. Okay, a system can, a process, or the process qualifies as a system if it satisfies what I just wrote here. The activities complement each other to produce the output. Or if the activities are able to, and if the activities are able to interact. So for example, I'm working on a project right now with the hospital here in San Marcos, the Central Texas Medical Center, in which they are seeing a high volume of patients, low-income patients that have no insurance in their emergency rooms. Okay, so the problem with that is patients that go to the emergency room, basically they are waiting until they are really, really sick to see a medical professional. Okay, because they don't have the money. If they don't have insurance, it's going to cost them a lot of money to get treated. So that's the problem. So the outcome for the hospital is obviously they want to see a reduction in the number of these type of patients coming to the emergency room, but at the same time they want to improve the health of these patients. So how do you achieve, well, first, that goal? First, you have to define a process. A process that will understand why are these patients waiting that long to see or to seek for medical assistance. Well, we have found some of the challenges in addition to the economic factor. Some of them have transportation issues, or some of them they just don't understand their condition, so they don't know how to proceed in terms of control their condition. So it's a three-dimensional problem that involves education, transportation, and also the economic factor. So a process we are working on designing a process in which we can make those things easier for them. We have developed a plan for a community clinic, which is already in place, that provides them with care at a very low cost. Then the issue of transportation. How do you make if they don't have a car, they don't have a way to get to the clinic, how do you fix that? Well, we have been working in a process in which we can have a taxi or taxi services, even Uber, help them get to their appointments. And then the education component, which means that how do we have classes for them in which they can be, because they already offer some classes in terms of courses in terms of nutritional values and how to control their or change their habits. But again, time, transportation, and all other factors are affecting them to get to these classes. So how do you design a process in which they cannot, by the time they go to their appointment, they also get these educational components so they can, at home, they can also improve their chances of getting better. So again, a system, very complex system, but it's a process, right? It's not a physical thing that you're designing for. You're designing different processes, scheduling processes, protocols, so you can achieve the outcome, but you achieve the outcome of the proposed outcome. Okay, so that's in terms of process model. So again, important thing here is that you understand that when you're designing a complex system, it's not just designing a physical structure. It's not a car, it's not just batteries, it's not just a computer. You can also design a system that is focused on designing a process, but it satisfies these conditions. This is called the pipeline model. And here, what we are trying to illustrate is an extension of the process model. So this is an extension. Of the process model. You have flow throughout entities is subjected to a series of processes with outcomes from one being the input to the next. So the idea here is that this type of model you have a sequential, a series of processes, and you know that if you complete the first process, the next thing will be the input of the output of the first process will be the input of the next process, and so on. So that's the idea. Again, an extension of the process model. And here we have an example in which you have the police and criminal justice as a pipeline system. So the idea is to illustrate the process of how do you find a person and how you take through the society. How do you manage criminals? So again, you catch the subject, you take it to the core, the criminal sentence, and then imprisonal, and after that, it gets back to the community. So again, step-by-step process, one after the other. The input is generates an output. That output is the input of the next one. And here we have the transport model. I think that's one of the last ones. In physics, transport phenomena generally refer to molecular diffusion or electrical conduction So when we say transportation or transport model, we're not just looking at cars, right? This is a phenomena that can have different meanings. So, for example, in math or in systems, mathematics associated to this phenomena in physics are applicable either directly or by analogy. So basically what this is trying to say is there are some observed phenomena in natural systems that we characterize mathematically, For example, in physics, we can characterize mathematically the molecular diffusion, or we can characterize mathematically the electrical conduction. Okay? So what this is trying to say is those models that are part of physics can also be applied to systems engineering. So for example, there are people who study the behavior of ants, okay? And that's a science, okay? So you can model and represent the behavior of ants. You put them in this environment. This is how they're going to react, and this is how it's going to move, and how, and so on. So those models that have been created and those algorithms have been also applied to people, like behavioral models for disasters conduct. So, and they have been put into practice in terms of trying to represent what would happen if it's a disaster happened and you have these many people in a place. How are they going to behave in order for planning for those events? And those models have been very successful in terms of representing the behavior of human behavior. So same idea here. So you are using those models, maybe from different fields, maybe applied to natural behavior, and you're trying to apply them to systems in order to understand and predict the behavior of your system. Another example is for road transportation. There have been people using the gravitational model to represent traffic flows in highways. Okay, so again, physics model applied to behavioral conduct and system behavior. And that's what we are trying to illustrate here with this transport model. So physics models that can be applied to understanding the behavior of other systems. So here's the idea: you have multiple systems, you have some transport 1 happening between these two, and transport 2 happening between them as well, represented differently, and you have some interaction also on the outside. And the idea, again, how can you use these models from physics or other sciences and be applied to your systems? And then finally, you're familiar with queuing. At least you have heard about it. This is another system thinking or open system models that are relevant for this class. So the idea here is that you understand the behavior based on capacity, the capacity of your server. Based on that, and also based on the rate of the arrivals, you can predict how long your queue is going to be, according to the number of servers, the server spanners, and the arrival rate. Okay, questions to this point? No questions. So we are going to move to the last two pieces of this lecture. We're going to discuss this fundamental system construct and then the fundamental principles for systems. So the following set of constructs are fundamental and common to all systems of whatever kind, real or abstract. There's going to be some interaction There's going to be some configuration. There's going to be some architecture, containment, complementation. There's going to be some hierarchy, and there's a construct that is called emergence. Anybody knows what emergence means? What is emergence? If you don't know, that's okay, but I just want to know. If you have heard that word before?
Where everything comes from one.
Like, yeah, there's some of that. That's part of it, but there's when everything comes together, there's a reaction. Okay, that's something that you are not necessarily aware of, unexpected in some sense. Okay, so that's emergence principle. So we're going to talk about it. So let's go through them. Interaction. All elements of a system are interconnected to allow for interactions. Conservation law applies except for information, as I mentioned already. It's a good question for the exam. So when I say systems engineering or in systems, conservation law always applies. That's not true. That's not the case for information, because you can share information and keep that same information, have data. So it's not that you're losing or changing or transforming the information. So that's why that's the only exception. Configuration. Since the elements of any system are interrelated, the part of their interrelationships form patterns or configurations. So as I mentioned here, so you start, if you start designing for a car, you need to provide some storage area, and you have to provide some control, you have to provide an engine. So as you start thinking about the design, somehow you're gonna start seeing some patterns. So all these parts should be part of the engine. All these parts should be part of the exhaust system. All these parts should be part of the interior, and so on. You start seeing those patterns and configurations. Architecture related to configuration is fundamentally the structure created by grouping and linking parts to form interacting subsystems and systems. So if you are familiar with computer science, system architecture is along those lines. You are trying to somehow create these classes in which you can start seeing the grouping and you can start seeing the hierarchy among the components. Containment is the demarcation of a number of complementary parts within a set boundary to form a system or a subsystem. So you have seen the group, you have seen the patterns, now you want to establish a boundary. Okay, so this part of the cell phone is going to be devoted to the camera. So nobody is going to enter this subsystem, or you're not going to put any components inside this subsystem if they are not related to the camera. We have a boundary here for the memory components. So you're not going to put components within this boundary that are not related to the memory, and so on. Complementation is the ability of parts of a system to complement each other such that all mutually contribute through the interaction of the whole system. It's very straightforward. Hierarchy is related to the architecture again. The vertical structure formed when complementary parts form a complete whole that can be considered as a unit with its own properties, capabilities, and behaviors. Emergent. So this is the last one. I was telling some of you the phenomenon of properties, capabilities, and behavior evident in the whole system that are not exclusively ascribable to any of its parts. For example, when you combine nitrogen, or the gas, and hydrogen, both of them are colorless, right? They have no color. But when you combine them, you end up with ammonia, which has a color that is yellow. So properties, capabilities, and behavior, they're not evident in the whole system, until you put them together. So this combination, even though they are gas, and this gas was colorless, both of them, when you combine them, you generate something new with a color. Emergence, the source is interaction. Emergent properties, attributes observable from outside. Emergent capability, limits of functionality, and emergent behaviors are responses to some stimuli. Finally, we get to the principles. Okay, so construct, these are very important. Last year, I asked a question. I wanted the students to tell me what were, we discussed 7. I asked them to tell me 5 distinct constructs and explain them in the exam. Okay, so these are important. So if you're paying attention now, you most likely are going to do very well in the exam. I've been telling you through the lecture today many things about the exam. If you're not paying attention, then you most likely are going to miss those questions. So system principles. So here I have the principles, the system constructs. So again, there are 7. We just discussed them. System principles, those are the ones that we are going to discuss now. A general rule or other statement of truth about systems in general. So the 5 principles acting together as an interactive whole define the essential characteristics and assumptions about the behavior of an organization viewed as a purposeful and multi-minded system. So these are the 5 principles: openness, purposefulness, counterintuitiveness, emergent property, and multidimensionality. So what it means, openness, means that the behavior of a living or open system can be understood only in the context of their environment. These apply also to non-living systems. So as I mentioned, I think at the beginning of the semester, when you are designing, for example, the F-150, they have, in Detroit, they have a bunch of areas that are devoted for testing the truck. So you can test the system in different environments to see how it reacts. So if you are in these conditions, if you drive the car in these conditions, and so on. So you can only understood in the context of their environment. You can only see if it's going to perform as expected until you see it working in the environment. Open systems by default are guided by an internal code of conduct. That could be DNA, or the actual system design. If left alone, open systems tend to reproduce themselves, and that's in the case of living organisms. A purposeful system is one that can produce the following: not only the same outcome in different ways in the same environment, but also different outcomes in both the same and different environments. Okay, so the idea again, depending on the environment, it has to be capable of somehow adapt to that to produce the outcomes. Here's some behavioral classification of systems. So they can be passive, they can be reactive, responsive, or active. That's what we call purposeful systems. Variable and chosen different structure in the same environment, choice of means, and the ends or the functions, different functions in the same environment, and so on. And again, some examples here. The passive system, a hammer, has no choice of means to perform the same function. Reactive, these are self-maintaining systems, such as the HVAC systems. No choice of means, but you perform the same function of heating or cooling. Responsive, these are goal-seeking systems, such as the amoeba, which is a animal. Choice of means is seeking food in different ways in the same or different environments. They have the same function. And then the actors, such as humans, choice of being to learn and to adapt. Choice of functions have the capability of self-maintaining and also build goal-seeking systems. This is a good one, multidimensionality. This is probably one of the most potent principles of system thinking. It is the ability to see complementary relations in opposing tendencies and to create feasible wholes with unfeasible parts. The principle of multidimensionality maintains that the opposing tendencies not only coexist and interact, but also form a complementary relationship. And I'm going to show you an example. So, for example, this is the first example. We have some graphs here. We have two tendencies. We can label them as high, low, low, high. And based on whether you are low, low, basically lose, lose. Whether you're located here on you can state the dimension and the reaction of each one of those tendencies, or the combination of those tendencies. This is a common one in which you establish what are your preferences, this type of exams, right? And then based on those exams, you get to know if you have this type of leadership style or so on. So for instance here, concern for change and concern for stability. And based on that, you can establish if it's high, then you have mature. If it's high-low, your type of thinking is conservative. If you are low-high, then you're radical, and so on. And here's the last one. Ability to find similarities among objects which seem to be different. Low-high, ability for difference among objects which seem to be similar. And then based on your classification, you can see if you're a problem solver, innovator, imitator, or problem formulator. Another example is here, and this is simple but powerful. And these are just gonna ask you questions here. How do you distinguish between a low and high tendency? Let's say that if you make $10 a week, maybe I might eat one burger, right? So that I'm not making enough money. So if I need to eat out, I would just eat a burger. If I'm making $20 a week, then I might have enough money to eat 2 times or 2 burgers. If I'm making $30 a week, I might try to eat 3 times out so I might eat 3 burgers. But what would happen if you start making $1,000 a week? Are you gonna still eating burgers for lunch? No, right? So that's the multidimensionality principle in effect right there. So that increment in your income is changing the way you are behaving, right? Well, you were making this money, I was going to eat only burgers during the week, but now I might try steak because I'm making $1,000 a week. Okay? So a quantitative change in my income at some point has produced a qualitative change in my way of life. That is the point of distinction between low and high in terms of income. Now let's think about the other direction. How about fuel price influence on your driving behavior? So if we have, if the price per gallon is $2.50 for the gas, you might drive an SUV or a truck. But then when you start seeing that $5 a gallon, maybe you start driving less, or you start thinking about changing your car, right? Let's say you instead of driving an SUV, you might purchase a car now. It's $10 a gallon, then you might be thinking about a hybrid or electric car. $15 per gallon, electric or maybe a bike, right? So again, changes in the income are producing a change on your behavior and your quality in terms of way of life. And that's the purpose of this principle. As you start seeing these changes, you see that tendencies are also changing. And as we discussed, the emergent property, so this is something that is not seen or expected, right? It is, instead of describing a property only in terms of being, you can try to understand it as a process of becoming. Emergent properties are the spontaneous outcome of ongoing processes, as we discussed for the ammonia. Combination of them, you see it in color. Life, love, happiness, and success are not only one-time propositions, they have to be reproduced continuously. The process that generates them end, the phenomena will also cease to exist. Okay? So they have to be reproduced continuously in order to for them not to cease to exist. Finally, counterintuitiveness means that the actions intended to produce a desired outcome may in fact generate opposite results. To appreciate this principle, you need to understand the practical consequences of the following assertions. Cause and effect may be separated in time and space. An event happening at a given time and place may have a delay effect, okay, producing an impact at a different time or at a different place. Cause and effect can replace one another, displaying circular relations. An event may have multiple effects. The order of importance may shift in time. Set of variables that initially played a key role in producing an effect may be replaced by a different set of variables at a different time. Removing the initial cause will not necessarily remove the effect. And, for example, difference between making a decision to go to college or not going to college. That would have, as an event, that can create different reactions. Doesn't mean that one is better than the other. I mean, you can be very successful without having to go to college. But if you make the decisions, you know that the outcome is not going to be right away. It will take some time to see what the outcome will be. So, so those initially decisions or variables that you are setting are going to create this set of outputs in the future. Social dynamics are brought with counterintuitive behavior. Example, the effect of smoking. Okay, so smoking, we have hardens the arteries, helps control weight. Right? If you are trying to control your weight, that could be positive, right? Even though the other three are really bad. You might not see the effect right away, right? Reduces the anxiety and damages the lungs. So it is bad for the heart, good for the heart, good for the heart, bad for the heart. I'm not encouraging you to smoke, right? I'm just saying that they have different effects depending on the point of view that you see it. Okay? And that could take some time to get to that outcome. Okay, so this is a summary of what this lecture was all about. System principles, the 5 principles all together as an interactive whole. They define the essential characteristics and assumptions about the behavior of an organization viewed as a purposeful, multi-minded system. And system methodology cannot be separated from this system's principles. Okay, so the homework is posted. Say here that you can start, but no, I'm going to use the rest of the time to discuss the project, since I think this is the first time that I have all of you here. So I think it's a good time to discuss the project.